more godly and important things, so that they can encounter God's presence. So they're doing the holy things for the purpose of encountering God's presence. Instead, Paul says to keep doing exactly what you already were doing, but now do all those same things with God, and so turn every last moment of your life into a sacred encounter with God.
Yes.
When a person goes into full-time ministry, how many hours do you think God gets out of you a week in a full-time ministry? 40, 60, 80? What's your guess?
120.
120. 120 hours a week towards God's work. God's work. Now, do you think that's enough for God?
No.
Is that what God's content with? Is that how He designed us? No. He wants every last moment, every last thought, every last emotion, every activity, every breath, every nose pick, every fart. He wants it all to matter. And that's what happens when we come to see our life primarily about not what we do for God and not what we do with God. But no. Yes, what we do with God. Not what we do for God, but what we do with Him. Our circumstances become sacred and holy. Martin Luther once had a young convert who was very excited, fresh Christian, excited, comes to him and says, all right, I've given my life to Jesus. Now what can I do for my Lord? Martin Luther says, well, what is your current occupation? And the man says, well, I'm a shoemaker. It's like, okay, well, then go make a good shoe and sell it at a fair price. I mean, let me tell you, if that shoemaker, if he makes his shoes with God, and if Brother Lawrence washes his dishes with God, what they're doing matters more than if I were to stand in front of you now preaching this sermon without God.
Amen.
What you do with God matters more than even the most sacred vocation performed without God.
Amen.
That is what matters most. Not the detail of the activity, but are you or are you not doing it with God? This is how Dallas Willard puts it. And admittedly, I do not know who Dallas Willard is. I read it online. But this is how he puts it. I don't know what the significance of this man's name is, but he says, truly there's no division between the sacred and the secular except what we have created. And that is why the division of legitimate roles and functions in human life into the sacred and secular does incalculable damage to our individual lives and the cause of Christ. Holy people must stop going into church work as their natural course of action and instead take up holy orders in farming, in industry, in law, in education, in banking, in journalism, with the same zeal previously given solely to evangelism or pastoral work. Does it mean that being a pastor or missionary is bad? Of course not. If that's what God has called you to do, you better do it. You're going to do it. You're going to do it sooner or later. What he's saying, what this man that I don't know is saying, is that the vocation is not what defines you. The question is, are you doing what God called you to do with Christ? If you're a mom at home up to your elbows in diapers and bottles and whiny, screaming kids, does that matter to God? If you do it with Him, it is sacred because He does it with you. And it carries the same dignity, no less, as somebody who's called to pastoral and missionary endeavors. Does my work at home, taking out the garbage and slaving over my Xbox, matter to God? If I do it with Him, yes, because His presence makes anything sacred.
Even
and brings
FIFA.
dignity to all things. So, the first thing that happens when we realize that our primary goal, our primary mission as Christians is to be with God, is that we change the way we see the circumstances that we're in. There is a second thing that happens, which is that it changes the way we see ourselves. It changes how we value ourselves, our value. My point here is that what matters most about you and about me is not what you do for God, but that you're with Him, because that is what God has always wanted more than anything else. He can use anybody for His purpose. In the Old Testament, it is considered a miracle when God spoke his word through an ass. And tonight we're all witnesses to the same miracle. He can use anything and anyone, even a Californian liberal who listens to rap music and has spent much of the money he's earned in life on drugs, cigarettes, and tattoos. This is a man who farts in the most inappropriate places and thinks it's hilarious. I wipe my boogers on things like I'm a 5-year-old. I'm nasty. I use colorful language in sermons. And I'm only halfway through one sermon. But what matters... What matters most is not that... What matters most is that he wants to be with me. And it's... For me, it's not that God celebrate the things that I can do for God. But that when he looks at me, and all my nastiness, and all my mistakes, and all my weakness, that he speaks to all the cosmos, and he says, "This is my beloved Son."
Amen.
He wants to be with me, and he wants to be with you. Remember, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus speaks of this day of judgment that is to come in the future. In verse 22 and 23, he says, "Many will come on that day and say, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name did we not drive out demons and perform many miracles?' And I will tell him plainly, 'I never knew you.'" So there will be plenty of people who do not make the cut, that have done plenty of good things that we look up to. And they're not going to make it because they never knew God. They never did. Their activities, whether they be holy and sacred and sexy and uber important or ordinary, they just never did any of it with God, and they're not going to make it. What matters most is not what you do for God. It's not what you've done against God. What defines you and defines me, and what matters most is that you are with God. This is increasingly hard to grasp in our culture because we live in a society that celebrates only what people can see, what can be measured. And that exists even inside the church. The truth is that what matters most can never be seen by others. It is that hidden, private, intimate communion of your spirit as it mingles together with God's Spirit in a mysterious union of Christ inside of you. The truth is that we all